Welcome to Green Giants, Titans of Renewable Energy, the podcast where insights and innovation meet. Every episode, we dive into conversations with industry leaders, experts, and change makers, bringing you the stories and ideas in the renewable energy sector that shape our world. And now, let's jump into today's episode with your host, Wes Ashworth.
Welcome back to Green Giants, Titans of Renewable Energy. Today, we're diving into one of the most misunderstood and consequential challenges in the clean energy transition, nuclear waste. My guest is Rod Baltzer, CEO of Deep Isolation, a company pioneering a radically different approach to storing and disposing of spent nuclear fuel deep underground using horizontal boreholes. Rod has spent over 25 years in the nuclear waste world, leading both waste control specialists and now Deep Isolation. He's one of the few people alive who can truly say he's trying to solve nuclear industry's toughest problem, and maybe the key to unlocking nuclear's future as a clean energy powerhouse. With that, Rod, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Wes. It's great to be here on Green Giants.
It's a pleasure to have you. Super interesting topic that I don't think we've discussed on the show yet. So super excited about this one and kind of talk through it. So as always, we'll sort of start at the beginning. What problem was Deep Isolation founded to solve? And what was the moment the founders realized nuclear waste could be reimagined?
Yeah, the founders, it's a father-daughter team, Richard Muller and his daughter Elizabeth Muller, and they were really looking at climate change and, is global warming real? Is climate change real? And if so, what do you do about it? And they've founded other startups, and they did decide that, it is real. We need to do something about it. So they started looking at alternatives and natural gas and other things, and they kept coming back to nuclear. They said, gosh, it seems like if we really want to make a difference, we ought to put nuclear power on the board, but people really don't like it. And part of that is the nuclear waste problem. We just haven't ever disposed of nuclear waste anywhere in the world. And so as they were thinking about it, they had actually heard a podcast on borehole disposal of nuclear waste, and they were thinking, oh yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. Yeah. And they were thinking about their experience with natural gas and directional drilling, and they realized, no, they were talking about straight vertical, not going horizontal. And that just opens up a whole nother level. And that's how the company got founded, really, was, hey, let's use this new directional drilling techniques that's been perfected in oil and gas over the last 20 years that nuclear just hasn't paid any attention to, and use that to dispose of spent nuclear fuel.
Yeah, it's super fascinating, especially starting from the climate question, ending up at nuclear waste. Not the usual path, I would say, but it's fantastic. It really sets the stage for how unconventional this company's thinking has been really from the start. And so for you, you've spent more than 2 decades in nuclear waste management. What pulled you into just such a complicated and maybe controversial field?
Pure blind luck.
Yeah.
So I'm an accountant by training. I'm a CPA and was actually doing work in audit, public accounting. And I was walking across the parking lot one day, and somebody I used to work with said, hey, if you're ever thinking about changing, we've got an opening at our company. Right. And I did change and went there, and they had a company called Waste Control Specialist. They were working to dispose of low-level radioactive waste. I didn't know anything about it before I started working on them, but I spent almost 20 years there, and came up through the finance side and wound up as CEO. And so got involved. And once you get in it, it's hard to get out. And it's just fascinating, as hopefully we'll find out on the podcast. But it's an interesting topic, and I kind of love it. You're making a difference. So you've got some value added, as well as just all the other kind of business aspects that go with it.
Yeah, super interesting. And I think we will get into some of those really interesting facts as we get going. It's one of those, it's like you're tackling one of the industry's deepest pain points really head on. And I love the fact that kind of like fell into it. So many great people that I talk to and great careers, it happens like that. It's not like they set out to this exact path, but ultimately it's where you ended up, and you find where you're supposed to be. So I love that. So when you first joined Deep Isolation, I guess what made you personally believe this could actually work, so that horizontal drilling could solve a decades old problem?
Yeah, one of the things people probably don't understand is the deeper you go, the more casing strings there are, the deeper the pressure, the higher the temperature, and it just gets more costly. And so when I found out Deep Isolation was going to go horizontal, so they didn't have to go as deep, and the canisters could lay on their sides instead of being stacked on top of each other, and they're heavy canisters, so they could crush, I thought, man, this is a game changer. This could really work, and that got me excited about it.
Yeah, it's cool too. Just the blend of oil and gas kind of meeting nuclear, maybe a unexpected crossover, but it's a cool, like, great example of just tech convergence, driving climate progress and just that innovation maybe from other industries as well too. And what happens when we open our perspective too and learn from what others are doing and other technologies that are out there. So I love that.
For sure.
With that too, I just want to kind of get into the nuts and bolts of it, because technology itself is what makes this such a breakthrough, and I think probably few people really know much about it. So can you walk us through how Deep Isolation's borehole system actually works, just in plain simple language? Like, what is it doing and how does it work?
Yeah. So when you've got a typical nuclear power plant, it has spent nuclear fuel assemblies inside. So the one that's most common in the U.S. is a pressurized water reactor, and so that assembly is about 12 inches. It's square, but 12 inches on the diagonal, and it's about 12 to 14 feet long. Yeah. And so our idea is, okay, take that one assembly and put it into a canister, a round canister, and then put that into a borehole. So you take a drilling rig, you drill down, call it a mile deep. It depends on the site and the geology and other things, but it could be anywhere from, a little less than a mile to 2 or 3 miles deep if you needed to. But it's a very gentle turn, because this is a big canister. It's about 16 feet long when it's all done and said. And you're going to turn about 4 degrees per 100 feet and wind up horizontal. Could be slanted or straight vertical. Using our directional drilling, it would be horizontal. And then you'd place individual canisters down through that borehole into the disposal zone in that horizontal section. You could put about 200 or so. It depends how long you go laterally. Generally, call it a mile deep and a mile long. You could place that with nuclear reactors, so you don't have to transport it, or you could have a centralized facility somewhere if you needed to. Depends on the country and what the community is interested in and all that entails. But the idea is one spent nuclear fuel assembly goes down a borehole that's fully cased. It's cemented into place. It's a very gentle curve. Put these in. It's about 20 of those boreholes for a 1 gigawatt reactor that has 60 years worth of fuel that it's generated from its lifetime. So very, very economical. It's about 70% less than a mined repository, which is the other technology that people have thought about.
Yeah, it's incredible. The image really helps. It helps it kind of make sense and get your head around it. And another thing, so you were talking about the universal canister system being really a game changer. What does that innovation really make possible that wasn't possible before?
Yeah, so our universal canister has really been designed for both that legacy PWR fuel we just kind of talked about and advanced reactor fuels. So this is your TRISO, molten salts, even vitrified waste out of reprocessing. And that canister, once you put the fuel in it, it can be stored above ground. So if you don't know what you're going to do with it yet, you can put it in above ground storage like all the other waste that's ever been generated.
Yep.
You can transport it if you need to between sites or to a disposal facility or a storage facility, whatever you need to. It could go into a borehole. Obviously, it was designed for that, with that purpose in mind, but also to a mined repository.
Yeah.
So if you really don't know what you're going to do, you put it in this universal canister, and it really is, flexible for waste types, and then you don't have to repackage it. So in the U.S. right now, we've got our waste in dry casks. These are much larger, 10 feet in diameter, about 18 feet tall, very thick walled and lots of shielding around that, but they hold 37 of these assemblies. If we had to repackage that, it'd be about $20 billion. So a lot of cost.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you get radiation dose from doing these operations and things. So, we're always kind of working with companies of this universal canister really is something that would allow you to be more flexible in your approach and package it for the long term, even if that long term is uncertain.
Yeah, pretty remarkable. In essence, like one design that can handle storage, transport, disposal, game changer for sure, and a huge simplification for a really, complex issue and complex industry. You also said, cost, which I really want to get into that a little bit. Deep isolation being up to 70% cheaper and dramatically faster than traditional mined repositories. Tell us a bit about that and what drives those economics.
Yeah, when the industry kind of started looking at different disposal options, they thought about boreholes, but this was back in the 50s, 60s, and they just didn't have the technology. And so they started looking at mined repositories and really kind of defaulted to that. And so when you think about a mined repository, it's about a half a mile underground, and it's about an 18-foot diameter, entrance. So you can literally drive a truck through it. And so when we look at a borehole, we've got a 21-inch borehole, and we don't have to excavate near as much rock.
Yeah.
When you're in a mine repository, you've got to have ventilation systems and lots of safety for underground workers and miners and things. You've got to construct that whole facility at once before you start putting waste in it. But with a borehole, it can be modular. So you can do just one if you want to start with, or you can put several in at a time. But you don't have humans underground. There's no ventilation systems or other things. So it really does help keep that cost lower.
Yeah. So cost effective, cheaper, safer, quicker. It really does sound like a no-brainer. When you really look at it, it's absolutely incredible technology.
You mentioned quicker. That's the thing. So when you look at like the Finnish program is going to be the first to open a mine repository. It took them 10 years to build their mine repository. When we talk about drilling a borehole, it's about 60 days.
Yeah.
And so, that's 1 out of 20, but that's a lot faster than what you can do a mine repository.
Yeah, huge efficiencies there, to say the least. Huge comparison there, without a doubt. The other thing, kind of myth I wanted to clear up is, a lot of people still picture nuclear waste as this green goo as displayed from The Simpsons. That's sort of the visual imagery. Tell us a bit about what's the reality, and you having such long tenure in dealing with this and being in the industry. What's the reality?
The reality is nobody takes liquid waste and puts that in a landfill anywhere. Yeah. So even with low-level radioactive waste, it's got to be dry. There's got to be a very, very minimal kind of moisture content, because you don't want this to travel, and you want to keep it contained. Same with the spent fuel. You expect this is dry inside the canister and keep it away from water. And there's lots of science behind why you need to do that, but that's the reason. And so that's probably the number one thing is this waste is typically heavy. So for spent fuel, it's a heavy and it's metal. And so it's a very robust form to keep up with pressures and temperatures and things that get created through the nuclear reaction process. And so that is much different than what you would see in The Simpsons of these barrels just kind of laying around and people bumping into them with donuts in their hand. Just isn't going to happen. Yeah,
absolutely. It's a funny comparison, but it's also powerful. I mean, I think most people haven't seen nuclear waste or had an encounter with it. So it's like, what do you have to go off of? Do you think visuals matter, and that kind of cultural myth can shape opinion and policy and everything else? So good to clear up.
For sure.
And kind of just taking that myth busting again a little deeper. Safety and perception are really everything in this space. And I know that comes up a lot. So what's the single biggest misconception people have about nuclear waste?
Yeah, I think, but besides the form of it, part of it is also the safety. And so people get very concerned about transportation, but there is a lot of protection that goes in as you transport this. We do transport nuclear waste around the U.S. and around the world, and it happens incredibly safely, but people are very kind of troubled by it. And I think part of that is it may bring it closer to their home through their neighborhoods. For an American, about 1 in 3 live within 50 miles of nuclear waste that's stored. Most of them don't realize that, but it's near, population areas, particularly along the coasts and things. Yep. So, I think some of those myths are out there. And as people start to look more at it and some of the safety stats on it, look up some of the YouTube videos. They've got literally a rocket strapped to a train that runs through a nuclear waste canister.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible video. So, encourage you to do a little homework at home after the podcast.
Yeah, I'll find that video and link it in the show notes as well too. So give everybody quick access.
Yeah.
With some of those safety concerns, you've modeled out safety scenarios out more than 1 million years, which is incredible, including earthquakes and aquifers. What do those results show you about how secure this really is?
Yeah, what we found is borehole disposal is very robust to a lot of different situations. So in our normal model, we're roughly a kilometer and a half deep, which kilometer and a half is about a mile. And then turn horizontal. We've also done vertical testing, but we assume that, that in a normal situation, how long does that waste take to migrate? It will eventually, that canister rusts and the waste gets out. We expect there are some underground transport flow processes and that there is a resident intruder kind of above the facility. There's an aquifer that he uses for drinking water, waters his garden, his cattle, etc. He's a subsistence farmer. And so how does that dose reach him? What kind of quantities and what kind of time scale? And so in the normal situation, it takes 1.6 million years for that peak dose to get there. We assume regulatory limit is 10 millirem. That's about a chest x-ray. And he's getting 1,000 times less than that 1.6 million years into the future. So, 1,000 times less than 10 millirem. My best analog is that it's eating a banana once a year. So
Yeah.
I typically have one every day for breakfast. That doesn't bother me. The average American kind of walking around gets about 600 millirem just walking around the face of the earth. So it's a very, very low amount. Even when we look at faults, like, let's assume we missed a fracture the size of the San Andreas fault that ran right through our disposal zone to surface
Sure.
and created a fast path. It still takes more than 500,000 years to get there, and it's still almost 1,000 times less than that regulatory limit. So it's faster, but it's still incredibly safe. It's just that depth. It just takes a long time to get there, and the waste decays, and there's lots of safety factors included with that.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, especially modeling out over 1 million years, kind of looking at those things. But it's great you're doing that work and thinking about the future and long term, and obviously seeing how safe it is, which is pretty incredible. I know you've also surveyed and show like 80% of Americans would rather have waste disposed below ground, where it's generated instead of transporting it long distances. What does that tell you about how people actually think about this issue?
Yeah, I think part of this goes back to that kind of transportation and being more concerned with that than some of the other factors. We transport and store nuclear waste. It's been very safe, but part of this is, the communities wanted the nuclear power plant there, and it created jobs and property taxes and economic development in general. And then after 60 years or so, it shuts down, and they decommission it and they tear everything down, all the buildings, places like waste control specialists to go dispose of that low-level waste.
Yeah.
But the spent fuel doesn't have a home, and so it just sits there above ground. You can't reutilize that property, and it's just, takes maintenance, security, monitoring for that waste for an unknown period of time. And so I think communities are concerned about transporting that past schools or through neighborhoods or anything, but you also don't want it just to stay above ground in storage forever. And so if you could put it in a safer configuration, keep below ground, and be done with it, I think that's where we're seeing there is some positive momentum toward that. It's a little different than, hey, I want to bring waste into your backyard that's not there.
Yeah.
They already have waste in their backyard. Now, what do you want to do with it?
Yeah, absolutely. And digging into the transportation side of that a little bit further, I know it's one of the most protested parts of nuclear, and where the concern is, and we've talked through that a little bit. So why do you think that is? And then how else do you address it when you're addressing those transportation concerns or those concerns about that piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, but part of it also is, when you live next to a nuclear power plant, you probably have neighbors that may work there, or you've taken a tour of it, or you see it in the news a lot, and they're contributing into the community, coaching Little League, whatnot. When it's just being transported, you don't get that context. You don't know how safely it's being handled. You don't understand some of that. And so I think that's part of it. I think there's not a lot of education we get on nuclear, just our daily lives, and so It is a little bit of a mystery. You can't see it, taste it, smell it. It's just this weird thing that you don't understand. It's hard to wrap your arms around. You might see a transportation accident with a semi who's hit a car, and you can understand that immediately, and you worry about nuclear waste doing the same thing, not knowing that for transporting that for spent fuel, they have to go through a battery of tests, including a drop from 30 feet onto a solid sphere object, putting it in jet fuel and burning it, and then put it in water and letting it sit there for a while and making sure it's leak proof through all of that. So it's really kind of amazing, the technology, engineering, and just robustness of the system.
Yeah, and incredibly safe, especially like once you really know all that. And as you said, most people probably don't think about it, but the more you learn and you find all those facts, you're like, okay, it's done obviously in an extremely safe way. We've touched on a bit of the technology and how it works and all those sort of things, and shift a little bit just to policy and politics that often make or break progress, and want to talk about that side. See, the U.S. still legally limits waste disposal to Yucca Mountain, a site that's been dormant for over 15 years. Tell us a bit more about that, and just how do you navigate that?
Yeah, the U.S. has what we call the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, and it basically says you can only dispose of spent nuclear fuel at Yucca Mountain, Nevada. Yucca Mountain is about 60 miles from Las Vegas, and Nevada's been very opposed to it for forever. And in 2008, funding got pulled, and so Yucca Mountain project stopped. The U.S. had spent, I think, $13 billion on Yucca Mountain,
Yeah.
and it just kind of stopped. And so we really haven't restarted it. It's gone through, changes of administration and different, politics in the White House and whatnot, but nobody's wanted to restart it. And so we're just kind of stuck. We can't use Yucca Mountain, but you can't use anything else because the Nuclear Waste Policy Act says you can only use Yucca Mountain.
Yeah.
So we really just need a change to kind of open that up, allow us to look at a second site, allow us to look at other technologies and be more kind of generic toward that, non-descriptive toward that.
Yeah. And it's, obviously pretty telling, not necessarily as much of a technology problem anymore. It's a policy bottleneck. You'd also shared like Europe, especially Eastern Europe, is really moving faster on solutions like this. And I always like kind of comparing to what else is happening out there. Why is the U.S. lagging behind? And what are some things that we could learn from what Europe is doing?
Yeah. So Europe has, they've had some interest in Europe with the EU taxonomy. And so they had this debate and they basically said, is nuclear green? Or are we going to include that and allow the financing of that to be deemed green, which gives you better financing terms? They said, well, we'll allow it, but only if you can have an operational nuclear disposal facility by 2050. Well, with these mine repository programs, it's almost impossible to meet that, but you could with a borehole. So Europe has been pretty interested in looking at some of these borehole technologies. Sometimes as a supplement to a mine repository. I've been talking bad about mines, but I'll note that we will need one in the U.S. Not everything fits in a borehole. We've got some waste forms that are too big. Same with, the UK or other places. And so, but a borehole can take some of that higher heat generating waste out of that mine repository and make it easier, simpler, and lower the costs for the whole program. But what we see in Europe is that, they're looking forward. There's countries like Estonia who have said, we don't have nuclear power right now, but we're interested. But if you bring a disposal solution. So we see a lot of interest, I guess, in Europe with looking at some of this, trying to meet some of their deadlines that they've got.
Yeah. And Estonia's approach kind of, it makes sense to me in saying, like, if you build nuclear, you must also build disposal. It seems like they should go together, but I guess why isn't that more just common sense everywhere?
Yeah, part of this was, when nuclear power started, we finished World War II and we had all the kind of destruction associated with nuclear bombs. And then we had Atoms for Peace and started building reactors and started putting those out. And people didn't think much about the waste. It's like, we'll deal with that when we get there, and didn't realize how hard it would be. And we've learned a lot with how to manage this waste over time. And we've improved the safety and reliability of nuclear in general, but particularly on the waste side. And so I think for some of the countries, they've been in nuclear for a while and they've got this legacy and they, have a hard time turning programs or changing policy. But for new countries like Estonia, they've got a blank slate and they've also got 70 years of history. And so they can look back on what has worked and what hasn't worked and what do you want to do now to make sure you're set up for the future. So kudos to them for being forward thinking and looking at this as they start to deploy, hopefully deploy new nuclear in those countries.
Yeah, again, their approach makes a ton of sense. And, if you use it, you own it and you should dispose of it. I think that's just good common sense. Obviously nuclear has come roaring back into the climate conversation. It's quiet for a good while. Now, recent years, it's like you're hearing nuclear a lot, SMRs and small modular reactors and everything kind of related around nuclear and all this sort of stuff. So thinking about that, and a bit more focus, attention, more of this stuff coming online now. How urgent is it that these disposal solutions are just ready before this next wave of plants? And what do you see when you're thinking about that?
Yeah, one of the biggest questions still out there is what are you going to do with the waste? And so, there is concern that if you don't have a waste solution, you don't have a really solid plan on what you're going to do with it, why should you build new nuclear? You're just adding to the problem. We've already got 400,000 metric tons of this nuclear waste produced globally. And so I think there is some urgency and need to get this done. The other piece of this is we're now exploring a lot of these new advanced nuclear plants, and they use different types of fuel.
Yeah.
And so as people have started to plan for mine repositories and things, we see Canada, they are going through a siting process right now for a mine repository, but it's for their CANDU reactors, but it's only for CANDU fuel. And now there's different SMRs and things being proposed for Canada that wouldn't quite fit that criteria. And so I think having a variety of tools in the toolbox so you can handle a variety of different waste and some of the new advanced wastes that haven't been as common. So I think there is an opportunity there.
Yeah. And what are you seeing? Do you feel like the problem is being worked on, in terms of policy and things like that as well too? Like, are you seeing progress happen at the same time as we talk about, bringing some plants online and things like that? Like, where is that? And do you feel hopeful about, hey, I think we're going to get there?
I do think we're going to get there. I am an optimist by nature.
Mm-hmm.
And that probably saves me, because things move slowly in nuclear waste and nuclear in general, but particularly nuclear waste. It's at the back. If I go to a conference, we're usually the last one on the agenda. If we're going to talk about waste. So I'm tickled pink that we're here leading the podcast here for Green Giants on nuclear, but. But I do think there's been interest. The U.S. government has provided a lot of grant funding for us, looking at this universal canister and some of the safety processes and things. So I think there has been an understanding that we need to do something about the nuclear waste, and that we can. There is technology out there. It is hard nowadays to get the government to kind of move forward cohesively. Right. Nuclear seems to be one of those bipartisan things. And so I am optimistic that we can make more progress on nuclear waste than we have in the past.
Yeah, good to hear progress is happening, and again that you're feeling hopeful and positive as well too, and what's unfolding. I want to switch a little bit, just talk about business for a moment. Innovation at the scale only works through collaboration, and I know Deep Isolation has MOUs with reprocessing companies and governments. How do partnerships like these help prove your model and accelerate adoption overall?
Yeah, one of the things we wanted to make sure at Deep Isolation was that we didn't recreate the wheel. And so as we partner with some of our supply chain partners, whether they're on the drilling or make nuclear canisters or provide high hazard specialty services, that's something we want to make sure we're leveraging. But we also want to partner with governments. These are typically, our customer is going to be a radioactive waste management organization. So in the U.S., it's the U.S. Department of Energy that's responsible for spent fuel. The utilities typically pay a price per kilowatt into a nuclear waste fund, and then that agency would supposedly dispose of that fuel. To be done yet, but in process. And so, working with these governments, making sure that they understand what Borehole can provide for their budgets, for their technology and sites, and just planning, those are important for us as well.
Yeah, it is really interesting. And I think more and more you see like the importance of these partnerships and collaborations, and really becoming a main focal point as well too, as the industry moves forward across a lot of different parts of the industry. Another thing I wanted to address, so there's the persistent myth that reprocessing or even fusion will eliminate the need for disposal. I guess, why do those ideas keep resurfacing, and what's the real story there?
Yeah, as you talk about the MOUs and things, we do work for Oklo and Shine, and we have MOUs with Curio, and these are all leading reprocessing companies in the U.S. Looking at that technology. We recognize that reprocessing or recycling could reduce some of the volumes, but all of these are still going to have a waste product at the end. And so if you could couple borehole technology with that, you might reduce the waste, and then you still have a safe solution for that at the end. But also, some of the fuel that has been there in storage for such a long period of time, it's old and cold, and it may be more challenging to reprocess. Some of the new advanced fuel types, some of that is a little more challenging to reprocess. And so maybe not everything fits through there. It'd be great to have a magic bullet, but none of these are.
Yeah, it's one of those, like, sounds great, but physics still wins out, and then there's still a waste product that needs to be dealt with is just normal part of it. So you've also worked with U.S. federal agencies and global partners as well. How different are those conversations in DC versus abroad?
Yeah, and like I said, we've gotten government grants. So DC, there is a favorable view, I think, of nuclear and what that can do, and particularly as we see the AI and data center usage and whatnot, there is so much more power that we're going to need to generate in the U.S. And having something that's clean, consistent base load, it just makes a lot of sense. We would love for them to spend a little bit more attention on the back end. There's been a couple of executive orders recently that kind of nudge that way, but we would love to see a little bit more attention there. When we look internationally, there's less hamstrings. We don't have the Nuclear Waste Policy Act internationally. The guidelines that they've got for safety and other things related to disposal are a little bit more agnostic for technology. They're not specific to a mine repository, but a borehole would fit better in there. And so we see a little bit more favorable insights internationally. We think our first customer is probably internationally and not in the U.S., just due to those reasons. But hopefully the U.S. can catch up and kind of take a leading role in that international scope.
Yeah, it is fascinating, and we tend to kind of lag behind. Hope one day we don't. We're sort of at the forefront of that, but also good to see these use cases in other countries as well too. And sometimes we need that little bit of extra case study to kind of look and go, all right, it worked. Maybe we should change our tune. Hopeful one day maybe we'll lead the charge in that as well too.
Lead it again. Yeah, the U.S. used to be a leader in both nuclear power and waste development and whatnot, and we've just really kind of given up the ghost. So yeah, we need to get our second legs under us and take off for the race again.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. And I agree. We'll get back to that. Pivot a moment from the technology to the person leading it and kind of just learning a bit more about you. So you mentioned you're a CPA by training, not necessarily a physicist or engineer. How does that shape your leadership and approach to solving, just highly technical, complex problems?
Yeah, one of the benefits from being in nuclear waste is that there is a lot of technology. I go to a lot of tech conferences and stuff that focus on the science behind some of this. I've sat through so many geology lectures, I'll say, for licensing processes and things that you learn a lot on the job. I think, part of what comes through is by learning the technology on the job, but having that finance background helps us lead a leaner organization, helps us keep focused on some of the business things that could kill a company, but really make sure you're developing the technology in the right ways to see that grow and really take hold. So I try to kind of balance those, but it's good to have that kind of ingrained in my personality, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think the business discipline shows, obviously thinking about scalability, cost effectiveness, where others might only see the science. It's great to have that marriage of the two. I think even more so today, just making the business case and making things make financial sense and talking about a lot of those costs and the business case versus just talking about green initiatives or climate change or what have you. I think it's becoming really, really important to help move the industry forward too. So I think it's a great marriage there, having both. And you having led both waste control specialists and deep isolation now, what's been the hardest leadership challenge that's unique to the nuclear space?
Yeah, I think part of this is just the back end. The waste is the last thing people kind of want to talk about. It's the last thing they think about. And usually by the time it comes to us, it's already kind of developed into a form and they've got it in a box of some kind. And it's like, well, how do I get that into a compliant kind of configuration that can actually be disposed of? And so that gets a little hard as we get through that piece.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Anything else you do thinking about that and just knowing that sometimes it's a bit of an afterthought, right? That it's the last thing people think about. Any approaches, strategies, things you've done that help, I guess, bring that earlier in the conversation or create awareness that it's maybe not the last thing thought about?
One of the things I tell everybody at conferences and whatnot is if you spend just a little bit of time up front thinking about the back end and the waste product, because we spend a lot of time thinking about fuel types or reactors or enrichment processes. But if you could just think of the back end a little bit, it will save you so much time, cost, dose from radiation, and it's really kind of worth the investment as you go through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you were able to speak just directly to the global nuclear industry, or those connected to it or interested in it, what's the message? Direct message you kind of share with them, give them about waste? What would you want them to know?
Yeah, I mean, I'd want them to know, I think we can do something about waste now. We have the technology. I think we've got enough willingness to do that. Let's not punt it to the next generation and let's do something now. It's been sitting out there just, waiting for somebody to do something for 70 years. We should do something. We can do this.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Powerful call to action. I agree. Take action now. And I think that follows suit with how we are thinking about things and how we are starting to go about things and not just, punting it down to like, oh, it's somebody else's problem, another generation's problem. They'll take care of it. I think we're starting to really take ownership to like, we got to do that something now. Create something that is going to take care of future generations and not just leave issues and problems for them. So I think that's a good one. Again, thinking about the overall nuclear industry, waste, everything that you're dealing with, Any other things that you commonly have to clear up, as you're talking to friends, family, even maybe at some of these conferences and things like that, where it's not directly nuclear, just misconceptions people often get wrong? Like, are there any other things that you typically share that people are a bit misinformed about?
It's probably different than the question you asked. The thing that has struck me is that some of these conferences we'll go to, it's kind of a combo conference. It's not specific to nuclear. We've got a diorama set up so it shows, our technology and the wells well underground and all this. And we'll get drilling people who come and don't know anything about nuclear.
Yeah.
And it's fun to ask them, what do you think about this? You talk about the technology for 5 minutes and they get it immediately.
Yeah.
And then it's like, do you think this is safe? And they inherently are like, yes, absolutely. And it's just kind of fascinating to me that, they get what depth does and how that rock interacts with different things and how safe it is under there, how hard it is to get things out.
Yeah.
And without having that nuclear background. The other thing is that, nuclear and oil and gas, they don't talk to each other as industries very much. And so, what we did a small scale test and we took a 3-foot long canister that was about 5 inches in diameter down an existing oil well.
Yeah.
And we left it there and brought all the cables back and then went back and retrieved it and pulled it out. Non-radioactive, but just a test. And everybody in oil and gas said, that is the stupidest thing you've ever done. Of course we can retrieve things out. We call it fishing. We take tools in and out of wells all day long. That's kind of what we do.
Yeah.
And everybody in nuclear went, man, that was the best test ever. I did not know you could retrieve anything out of a borehole. And it's just kind of bringing these two cultures together has been kind of fascinating to see their misconceptions or perceptions and what how they interact with each other.
Yeah, I love that you shared that. And I think there is really a true need for collaboration across industries, kind of breaking those echo chambers and start to share and collaborate and talk across those different sectors, which agreed most of the time they don't, but we can learn so much for each other. And I think we all have the same goal in mind that, we all want energy. We all want a future. We all want, a planet going forward, and, we can talk and collaborate and share, and a lot more happens that way. So love that message. Kind of like as we end and get closer to the end, I want to start by, looking forward a bit. The story isn't just about managing the past, it's about shaping the future, as we shared. So if deep isolation's model is adopted widely, what does the world look like 20 years or more from now?
For deep isolation, we want to be successful, and we see that as actually disposing of nuclear waste. And so, we think we can be operational and start disposing of nuclear waste in the next few years. So in 20 years, I would expect this has been implemented in several countries around the globe. It's been safely done. There's been, I'll say acknowledgement that this is a safe, cost-effective way to do this. And it gets implemented and is kind of recognized as just, kind of the status quo, I guess, for disposal in the industry.
Yeah, it's an inspiring vision, one that I think reframes waste as part of progress rather than a barrier. On the flip side of that, so if the world fails to solve the waste issue, what's the risk?
Yeah, the risk is, would that provide a stumbling block for implementation of new nuclear, which I do think would help with, clean climate and just clean air goals and other things as well.
Yeah.
The thought is that once waste has been in storage for about 100 years, you may have to repackage it. So as have crossed the 60-year mark and are heading quickly to 80, we don't want to keep that out there very much longer. So hopefully we can have this solution and not have it still stuck there and have to worry about all the repackaging and other efforts that would go into it if we fail to dispose of it now in a timely manner.
Yeah, it's an important point and a good reminder. Like climate progress, any of this energy progress can be selective about which problems we solve. Need to solve the problems directly and head on. Let me ask you this. So for the next generation of clean energy innovators, ones that are coming up, out of experience of you kind of getting involved and getting started, what advice would you give those just that are tackling big, messy challenges like this one from your experience?
Yeah, you definitely have to go big. I mean, do the impossible, but don't always have an action plan as well.
Yeah.
I mean, trying to go big without having a detailed action plan is kind of hard. There's lots of pivots along the way, but it is one of those, you've got to have that overarching vision, go big, make sure it happens, but got to do your block and tackling to make sure you get all the details. Nothing can fall through the cracks, unfortunately.
Yeah, I love that. Good advice, sound advice there. Final question, anything else that you didn't get to share? Final points to leave with the audience can be points of advice or hopeful messages or anything else related to what you do and what people should end on.
Wes, I really appreciate the conversation today. I think we've covered everything, and the message really is, we've got solutions for waste, nuclear waste. We can handle this. We do need to get kind of politics out of the way and just kind of focus on getting it done, get her done, and make some progress, have some leadership back in this area again.
Yeah, I like that. And get her done. Don't make it a political issue. I love that. Let's make progress. Let's make it together. Great way to end it and kind of wrap up. But Rod, thank you so much for joining me today and for the important work you're doing to help redefine how we think about nuclear energy and waste. It is a complex topic, but conversations like this are exactly what moves the industry and public understanding forward. To our listeners, as always, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, share the show with others who care about the future of clean energy. Check the show notes for some important links as well. And with that, we will see you soon.
This episode of Green Giants, Titans of Renewable Energy, was brought to you by Lead Group Search. If you enjoyed today's discussion and are looking to recruit top talent for your company or find your next career opportunity in the renewable energy sector, visit leadgroupsearch.com. Let's continue driving the future of clean energy together. Until next time, keep pushing toward a greener future.